Welcome to TG Talk, where we talk to the generation about reaching the world for Christ. Hello, I'm Bobby Bosler, and welcome to another episode of TG Talk here today. What I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a little announcement here today. As I think most of you know, we've been really doing a lot of work on our outreach campaign and trying to reach the world with the gospel of Christ, even here during our confinement. But recently, as I've been having some meetings and some discussions with some other folks, we realize, we need another outlet as well, something I think to encourage you all in an exciting way. So I am pleased to announce this coming Thursday, we are going to be having a brand new event that every single one of you are welcome to join, called The Generation Youth Night. Now, The Generation Youth Night is going to be on the Zoom platform. It's going to be this Thursday from 7 o'clock to 8:30, that's Central Time here in the U.S. I know we've got a bunch of international listeners and viewers, and so if you're able to work it out to come and attend, you're welcome to attend regardless of what country you come from. But we are going to be in this event, Dr. Jim Van Gelderen and myself, we will be hosting competitions, online competitions, a lot of fun things. We've concocted some real creative uses of the Zoom platform where we're going to be able to get you all directly involved. We'll be handing out gift card prizes for individuals that win in the variety of competitions. We're going to be having some testimonies from some The Generation young people and those who are just out of that age range. And then both myself and Dr. Jim, we will be giving two challenges during this time for you all in this time of quarantine and crisis. And I know things are easing up a little bit, but honestly, young people, we need to be engaged and mobilized and ready to go as soon as we're able to go beyond what we can currently do right now. Registration is free, and if you, we do encourage you pre-registering since we have a limited number of seats available, several hundred, so we're probably not going to reach it, but you never know. If you would like to register for this event, you can go to thegeneration.org/TGYN, and you can sign up there. Like I said, it's free. It's going to be this Thursday night, and I know you all are going to greatly enjoy it. Now, what I want to do here today is I want to dive into back into our Bible study. As most of you know, we've been studying Paul and his confinement there in Roman jail, and how though the way he went about his ministry was radically altered, the ministry didn't stop because God was continuing to lead him. He had an undeterred motivation to accomplish Christ's mission for him on this earth, and part of that mission involved motivating the Philippians that they also need to be undeterred and their motivation to strive together for the faith of the gospel. We've recently been in chapter 3 where Paul has shifted subjects just a little bit, and he wanted to warn them of some individuals that were dangerous. He wanted them to beware of those dirty dogs, those people with the theological persuasion that caused them to be working for evil. They were mutilating what God had intended. And we talked about the fact that we shouldn't mutilate the way that God intends for us to live the Christian life either. And so what we're going to do here today is we're going to continue reading and studying in chapter 3 in verse number 4. Let's go ahead and look at it to set up our discussion here for today. Verse 4, he just got done saying, we're the real deal. We worship God spiritually. We rejoice. We boast in Jesus Christ, and we don't have confidence. We're not relying on the flesh. But notice in verse 4, he says, though I might also have confidence in the flesh. If any other man thinketh he hath, whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Now, before I go on to give his supporting arguments for that, what he's essentially saying here is, listen, the problem with the mutilators ultimately at its core is that they are counting on the flesh. They are relying on what they can do, whether it is a cutting of skin or whether it's keeping the law or whether it's just trying their best to earn favor with God. He says, listen, if anybody could do that, if anybody did do that, I did it. And furthermore, I did it better than any of these people did it. Now, he is not saying that a person can earn favor with God. He's saying, if you could, I did. And what he's going to do here is in verses 5 and following, he is going to pull out his list of personal commendations, his list of things that he used to think he had going for him. He says in verse 5, circumcised the 8th day. Now, the idea of this, and again, I don't want to get into the whole circumcision issue, but there was a minor surgery that they would do on a baby in cutting off a portion of their flesh, and the Old Testament required that that should be done on day number 8 of the baby's life. And he's saying, listen, my parents raised me according to the book. Even down to the smallest little thing, my parents made sure they did everything right. He says, of the stock of Israel. He's saying, listen, I came, my family lineage has in it the right people. In other words, not just my father, not just my grandfather or my great-grandfather, but all the way back, my people were God's people. I come from a line of God's people. He says, of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, now this one may not hit us initially, but he's saying, listen, of all of the different tribes of Israel that I could have come from, I came not just from generally God's people, but I came from some of the most faithful of God's people. In order to understand this, we got to understand just a little bit of the history of Israel. Israel, I think you know, under David and Solomon, it was a united kingdom. All 12 tribes were under the same kingdom, but King Solomon's son Rehoboam, though his father was the wisest man who ever lived, wisdom is not hereditary, young people. And his son did not heed his father's wisdom, and because of that, he split the kingdom in two. And then he had the northern tribes, which were the 10 northern tribes, and the southern tribes, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, which included the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. And if you know anything about the history of those tribes, you will know that the northern kingdom, every single king was an evil king. But the southern kingdom vacillated from having evil kings and good kings, and there were times of genuine revival in the southern kingdom. And if you could broad brush both kingdoms, you would say the northern kingdom was the bad kingdom, and the southern kingdom was the good kingdom for the most part, sometimes, half the time, less than half the time. It was better than the northern kingdom. And he's saying, listen, he's saying, I came not only from the right people, I came from the best of the best people. I came from one of the 2 faithful tribes in the southern kingdom. He says, and Hebrew of the Hebrews. I am a Hebrew to the core. I learned the language Hebrew when I was little. I have continue to identify as a Hebrew. I'm not worldly. I have been faithful to displaying my identity as a child of Israel, as a Hebrew, and I've done it more excellently than my peers. He says, as touching the law, a Pharisee. We could say here, as touching conservatism, a fundamentalist. Okay, he's saying, listen, when it comes to dotting every I and crossing every T, I came from the strictest stripe of Judaism. We were the strictest people on planet Earth. Like, you could not find a stricter Jew than we were. He says concerning zeal, persecuting the church. He says, listen, my parents raised me by the book. I came not only from the right people, but from the most faithful of those people. I grew up in the strictest stripe of these people. As far as obeying the requirements, I did it all, okay? I did as much as anyone else did, in fact, even more. But he says, as far as just my zeal, as far as my willing desire to serve God, I was so zealous about Judaism that I actually endeavored to persecute what I saw as a threat to it. I persecuted the church. He says, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. He said, listen, people who observed my life, they could not point out a single thing that I did in disobedience to the law. He's not saying that he was perfect, but he was blameless as far as human eyes could see. Now, God could see his heart. God could see what man could not see. Paul here was a sinner, but he's saying here, listen, he says, listen, the problem with these mutilators is they're counting on the wrong thing. They're counting on what they can do. And as a result, they do not have a real spiritual relationship with God. They are counting on, not on Jesus, but on themselves. And listen, if anybody could do that, if that were a valid means of getting favor with God, I'd have done it. Here's what I did. But notice in verse 7, and this is his testimony here. He says, but what things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Now, when he says the word gain here, we got to understand these things in his mind before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus were huge pluses. They guaranteed in his mind that he had favor with God because his parents raised him by the book, because he came from the right people, because he was the strictest of the strict, of the faithful people, because in zeal he was doing everything that he could to tamp down the threats against God's temple and God's way as he saw it. And listen, nobody could pin me down on anything as far as disobeying the law. I was as righteous as the law could make me. But he says those things that I thought would be sure, they would surely get me an audience with God, I came to the point where I counted them all to be loss. Now, I have to say, and we're going to get into it in a future episode here, I believe he primarily is speaking about how he got saved. On the road to Damascus, he realized that his righteousness and all that went along with it was insufficient to get him favor with God. He had to stop counting on his good deeds, on his list of things that if God would have said to him, why should I let you into heaven? He'd said, well, the 8th day of my life, this happened. And he'd go down the list. That was his list of things that he was counting on to get him to heaven. And he says, I had to come to the point where I took that list and threw it out the window. Because as long as I was counting on those things, I was lost. I was still a sinner. I was still on my way to hell. And I had to instead rely on Jesus. Remember, he's saying we're the real deal, right? We are the circumcision, which worship God in the Spirit and not in the flesh. We have no confidence in the flesh. We boast in Jesus Christ. Our boast is not our list. Our boast is Jesus and him crucified. And he's teaching here the Philippians, beware of those dirty dogs, because they'll tell you that your list is just fine. In fact, it's necessary. Now, I think most of you who are watching this would say, well, there was a time in my life when I threw my list out the window too and instead chose to depend on Jesus who died for me and rose again. And I have to say, praise God that you counted all of your good deeds and all of your righteousnesses as loss so that you could gain Jesus Christ. Praise God for that. But young people, did you know you can continue to have a list even after you're saved? Now, this is not, I believe, the primary purpose of this passage, but did you know, young people, that how you got favor with God is how you continue to walk in favor with God? How you access God's grace for salvation is how you continue to access God's grace for every step of the Christian life. And you know what I find sometimes, young people? We think this. We think, well, you know what? My parents raised me by the book. That's got to count for something in my walk for God. and we say, God, hey, look, God, my parents raised me in a good old independent, fundamental Baptist church. So, God, that must mean that I deserve for you to use me. Do you see how wrong that is? He goes, again, we could go through this for a Christian. He says, listen, I am a part of godly people. We may be able to point back through our lineage, and maybe your dad is a pastor or a deacon or a missionary, and maybe you come from a line of godly, not just godly people who went to church, but like some of the cream of the crop people who've served God, who sacrificed much for the work of God. And it's easy to say, hey, listen, look at my family. Look at my heritage. Surely, God, that's got to count for something. He says, listen, it's touching the law of Pharisee. I come from the strictest backgrounds you could ever imagine. I don't care if you are the most conservative family in your state. I'd be excited for that. I think that's great. But that's not what gets you favor with God. That's not what gives you his grace. He says, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, and I doubt any of you think that persecuting the church is going to help you with God, but you can claim your zeal as a reason why God should use you. Maybe you're the most zealous young person in your youth group. Maybe you'd say, but look at what I've done. I've done this, I've done that, I've done that. Surely God, I deserve God's favor because of that. He says, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. And maybe you'd say, you know what? I may not be perfect, but honestly, people can't pin anything on me. I'm a good kid. And people think of me as a good young person. And can I say this, young person, just like you had to stop counting on all that you thought you had going for you to get saved, you need to stop counting on all you think you have going for you for God's grace in the Christian life. Those things that were gain, that were in my helping me list, Paul counted them loss. And you should too. Now, I'm not saying you need to forsake your family heritage. I'm not saying you need to downplay it. It's a blessing. It's amazing. I'm so thankful for the fact that my dad is a faithful, godly deacon in a good independent church in New Jersey. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that my mom served the Lord as a missionary for 15 years in Niger, West Africa. I'm thankful for that. But when I come to God, I don't come to him claiming my upbringing. I don't come to him claiming that I've been squeaky clean for the last week. I don't come to him claiming X, Y, or Z. I come to God and say, God, Jesus lives in me. And I don't deserve your strength. I don't deserve your power. I don't deserve your anointing or unction for this next preaching opportunity or ministering opportunity. I don't deserve any of it. I'm not coming to you with a list of reasons why you should use me. I'm coming to you because you said you want to use me and because I have Jesus in me and he's the only one who deserves it. So I'm counting on him and I'm going to confidently boast in him and rejoice in him. And when we come to God like that, young people, God will use us. There's a lot that could be said, and I've already gone way over time for a normal TG talk here today. But there's theology embedded in this, and we have got to get past our own, dare I say it, self-righteousness. Listen, I think TG talk and the generation draws a very conservative, a very godly, a very zealous crowd, but we cannot count on our conservatism or on our godliness or on our zeal. We must depend on Jesus. Young people, there's a certain sense in which you need to surrender and let those things go as far as your list. The list needs to go out the window, not that you stop having a godly heritage, not that you stop living in surrender to the revealed will of God to be godly, but don't count on that. Count on Jesus. So let's surrender to God's intention for us, and let's depend not on what we can do or not on our heritage or lineage, but let's depend on Jesus to turn the world upside down with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Hey, thanks so much for tuning with us all the way to the end. Make sure you visit that URL to sign up for the Zoom meeting, thegeneration.org/TGYN. And hopefully we'll see you on Thursday night. Thanks for watching.